The raised planter beds we mentioned in the previous movie, we'd like to hatch around the outside. So our drawing colour is currently 33, and if we say draw and hatch, and if we pick a point, which is the quickest and easiest way to hatch, and we click in that, let's zoom in, and we click in this zone here, can you see it's just the outside of the rectangle that's picked, and no matter what we do with the next click, we're not going to hatch properly. So let's repeat the command. This time we'll select the entity and we'll put a crossing box across, and then we can hatch. So we should get a dark line around the outside, and that works very well. But so it's worth playing with that pick option. When you have more complicated shapes like I've drawn here, here's a polyline and another polyline and a couple of circles inside, so they're islands. If we use the hatch pattern again, hatch command again, and pick a point, we pick here, well, that creates a polyline around that zone, but we can pick another internal point and another internal point. So now we should be able to finish the hatch, and it should hatch that complex shape, and we'll OK it. We're just using a solid fill. So you can see it's useful to experiment with both options in the hatch command. Well, if you've been using, say, one of the templates in gCADPlus and put some symbols into the design, you'd notice that when you select a symbol, a blue dot or a handle, square box, will appear at the insertion point of the symbol. And for some reason in this drawing, that's not happening. And in fact, what I wanted to do is to pick this polyline which runs all the way around the edge of some hardwood decking. I wanted to move the end of a polyline around, and that's not easily to manage here because these handles are not showing. Let's just draw a circle again, and we'll put the circle down here and we'll zoom in on it. I should be able to pick the circle and I should see the various snap points on the circle, and it's not showing. The way to fix that is to go to Tools and Global Parameters, and then in this little dialog box, pick Grips. Where it says Enable Grips, it's turned on. Sorry, grips are turned off, and I want to turn them on. I'll say OK. So now when I select the circle, can you see I can now see the control points, the center point and the 4 quadrants of that circle. So what that enables me to do once that's on is, if I pick this, you can see there's the insertion point. It's not quite in the center, but that one is in the center. So it makes it a lot easier to maneuver things around. For example, and it's a rather nonsense example, I could say, select this one, I could say right click and move. I'm asked for the base point. I could pick there, and then I could right click and go to a snap override and pick midpoint, and I could do that. So I've moved that circle precisely to the midpoint of the line. Let's get rid of it because it's just there for illustration. So now whenever we pick entities, here I've picked a line, we can pick an end point like so. So it can really slow you up. You wonder quite what is happening if those grips aren't turned on, because you can do an awful lot of editing just with the right mouse button and an ability to select. Well, if we zoom in on that decking area, notice that there are double lines in it. It's not hatching per se. These are 2 individual lines. And let's imagine that what I wanted to do was to hatch an area, come into that gap that goes from the door out onto the decking. Looks a little awkward to me, and I'd like to be able to manipulate the hatching a little easier than we can now, where they're just individual lines. So to do that, I've turned my drawing colour to red, and I've come over to Entity Snap, and I'm going to leave a running endpoint snap. Object snap is now on. So in order to hatch an area like this, it's a lot easier to hatch it when you have a closed polyline over the space. So I'll draw polyline, and remember that snap is on, so I can come to this endpoint. We'll deal with the arc a little later, and then I'd come here and there and then down there, and I hope you can see that there's a red line now. A new polyline is being drawn over the zone that we wish to hatch, and you can see that having a running OSnap on can help. Not quite sure why there's such dense hatching in there, but let's leave it as is, and I think we can imagine that raised garden bed can sit there, and we can come all the way up here. So remember what we're trying to do is to form a closed space. Now at this point we need to draw an arc. So if I right click in the polyline, as you know, you can go into an arc mode, and you can see the arc is bending. It appears to be bending in the wrong direction. Arcs are drawn anti-clockwise, but I want to come to this end point and then right click to enter, and we have our polyline done, but you can see that the arc is not working well. Now because we had our handles turned on, or our grips turned on, we can much more easily work with the polyline. We just need to do a small amount of adjustment. So I can click on this handle here and move it, and I want to move it to our end point is on, so it's jumping away. And what I'm going to do now is take OSnap off, and now, where are we? We'll try that again. We should now be able to move that point, I'd say perpendicular to the existing arc. So perpendicular like so, and there you should be able to see now the polyline enclosing that space. So now it's a closed area, and we can very easily get rid of all of these duplicated lines, and they're now gone, and we're just going to use the hatch command and work on this space here. Well, now that I've removed that double line hatching, I can select and find the original space. So I think what might have happened is that a polyline has been drawn around that space, and then hatching has been applied, but then the hatching has been exploded. So let's delete that, and if we now click on, there's our polyline giving us the more complex shape. So let's see if we can now hatch it. Our drawing colour is by layer, so it's on layer deck. So let's set our drawing colour, or let's go to layer deck, and here we are, and our drawing colour we want to change to by layer. So whatever we do now will inherit the colour of the layer. So we can say draw and hatch. Now we've played with this before in this movie, but we could do a solid hatch, or we can pick our hatch pattern, and we could use what we'll do now, and keep it simple. We will just use the line hatch pattern, and we'll give it an angle of 90 degrees, and we can either now select the entity or pick the point. Let's pick the point and see what happens. And it does well because it ignores the blocks that are over it. Having done that, now the next thing to do is to look at the scale. The density here is far too great. try for a density of maybe 1, 4, 5, somewhere in the less than 10. So we'll change that density and we'll say 100, 1,000 gives us 4. I think that's going to be too wide, but let's try. And our angle, we need to change to 90, and we can apply it. Yes, that's way too big, so we can bring that down to, say, 200, and even we probably need closer to 50. So you just experiment. Now that works much easier than what we had before, and then extends out into that area. So using a polyline to define an area and then apply your hatching is a really easy and better approach. If you want that to be drawn in a heavier line, then of course you can go in this drawing, colour and thickness is being controlled by the settings in the layer. So we could go into the line weight here. If we wanted a thicker line, we could set it at 0.3 and OK that, and you can see now things thicken up. Well, I'm told that the intention is to fill this area just outside of the building, between the building and the deck, with compacted granite. And I want to indicate that, and I'd like to show one way of doing that. You can define just a patch of the area with a polyline and do some spline fitting so it's a reasonable shape. Now we'll call the hatch command up again, and this time we'll pick the AR concrete one. We could use that, or better still, there's a AR sand, which is a random dot pattern, and we can pick the entity. I'll do it in steps. So we'll hit here. So we've chosen the pattern, and our scale is, see how the density now drops to 0.05. Don't think of this as a physical distance, it's just an arbitrary number. And let's come back to 100, maybe 20, and that might get us somewhere where it works reasonably well. So the hatching is in here, but it's difficult to see. So probably only going to need about a twofold scale. So I'll unselect all. So we've got something that, apart from its colour, so let's pick a different colour. Most of these that I see have a sort of sandy, yellowish sandy colour, a little bit browner than that. Something like that one, and we'll OK it and unselect all. So the hatching is there. You might be able to see now as we zoom out, it's got a pale yellow colour. Maybe we might take that to 1 and get it denser so it's a little easier for you to see. So it's definitely got a solid fill area. Another approach though is to ignore doing hatching, which is colour 254, and just pick this and make the line colour 254, and because it's a closed polyline we can fill it and do that. So it, and maybe you need an outline for it, a border, but I don't think that's necessary, and we could just label that. That we've got the fill. So for mine, it's a bit of an overkill if you use hatching, which can put lots of entities into a drawing. I'd rather indicate a zone. Not entirely happy with that. I'd like to bring that down there, and like so. You can always add extra vertices, like so, and then move that vertex over a little, maybe add another vertex, and we're just about right. So we zoom out. For mine, that looks a little better. I can't help fiddling, and I just move that like so. So now there's a band through there indicating compacted granitic fill, and I think that's a lot nicer then working on that hatching, so I'll delete it and I'll just use matched properties and match the properties of this polyline to that one, and that for mine is a much nicer looking design. So I hope we've answered some of the problems that this student was having working on this drawing, and I hope you can see we're improving things a little. As I do a little more, we may come across some other issues